I never expected that moving into a small log cabin in the woods would change the way I saw the world and my place in it. The cabin sat on the edge of a vast stretch of forest in the Pacific Northwest, where firs rose like cathedral pillars and every sound seemed amplified in the quiet. The wind threw needles, the intermittent knocking of a woodpecker, the low gossip of the creek. I had come seeking solitude, space to think, and to write. What I found was a story that even now feels too strange, too beautiful to keep entirely to myself. It began one late autumn afternoon, just before the first snow dusted the high ridges. I was splitting logs behind the cabin when a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping between two trunks about 20 yards away. At first I thought it was a deer, but the silhouette wasn't right. It was taller, heavier, and moved with deliberate, almost silent steps. I stood with my axe in hand, scanning the trees. Nothing appeared, so I returned to my work, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But that night, as the wind carried the scent of pine through my open window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been watching me. Over the next weeks, small signs began to accumulate. Footprints broad, human-like, but much larger showed in the wet soil near the creek. I found a bundle of fish laid neatly on a flat rock by the water, as if left for someone to find. Once, I woke to hear a low, resonant humming outside the cabin. It wasn't menacing, more like a lullaby hum to the forest itself. Curiosity edged out fear. Whatever was out there didn't seem to wish me harm. One morning, while hiking a familiar trail behind the ridge, I saw them clearly for the first time. There were three, two large figures and a smaller one that clung to the arm of the taller. Their fur was the color of tree bark, mottled with silver at the crown, and their faces, though broad and framed in thick hair, were unmistakably expressive, curious, cautious, but open. The smaller one peered at me from behind its guardian's legs with wide, dark eyes. I stood very still, unsure whether to speak or move, and in that quiet moment, we simply looked at one another. Then, the tallest raised a hand not in warning, but in greeting, and they slipped back into the trees. Encounters like that became more frequent, always brief, always at a distance. They seemed to be studying me as much as I was studying them. I began leaving small offerings, a basket of apples, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. In return, I'd find woven mats made of moss and cedar bark near my door, or polished stones stacked in deliberate little cairns. Over time, these exchanges became our language. One cold December night, I was startled by a knock, three slow, deliberate taps on the cabin's back wall. I stepped outside to see the tall figure waiting in the moonlight. The others were nearby but keeping to the shadows. I realized then they were inviting me to follow. We moved quietly through the forest until we reached a sheltered glade, a place I had never stumbled upon in all my wandering. There, around a low fire pit ringed with smooth stones, they sat together, the family. The young one watched me openly now, its earlier shyness replaced by a kind of joyful curiosity. No words passed between us, at least. None in the human sense. But there was communication, through gestures, through the way they shared food from a basket woven of reeds, motioning for me to do the same. The elder reached toward me, touching my chest lightly, then placed his hand over his own heart. It was the simplest of messages, "You belong here now." From that night onward, trust grew between us. I learned to read their ways, the subtle calls echoing through the forest that marked territories, the way they worked together to gather food, how they cared for the young one with infinite patience. In turn, they learned me my routines, my habits, and my harmlessness. Perhaps the most startling moment came in early spring. I had been away for 2 days, hiking into town for supplies, and returned to find a neat arrangement of wildflowers pressed against my cabin door. It was unlike any of their previous gifts. The flowers were a vivid mix of violet and gold, bound together with strands of moss. I understood it for what it was, a welcome back. There were times I wanted to tell someone, to share the astonishing reality of what I had discovered, but I understood instinctively that their survival depended on secrecy. The world beyond these trees would not offer them trust or understanding. It would bring cameras, hunters, and cages, whether of steel or of curiosity. The gift they had given me was not just their presence, but their confidence that I would protect it. Living alongside the Bigfoot family changed me profoundly. Before, I had thought of nature as something apart from humanity, a backdrop against which we live our busy lives. But in the quiet companionship of those beings who walked between myth and reality, I learned that we are not separate. The forest breathes through us as much as we breathe within it. Trust is not something that can be demanded. It is earned slowly, in silence, in kindness, in respect for what is fragile. That spring, I planted a small garden behind my cabin: potatoes, beans, and tomatoes. Sometimes in the early dawn, I'd find signs that they'd been there. A row of beans weeded more neatly than I'd left it. A cluster of fresh wild berries set beside my growing plants. There was no ownership to speak of. The garden became as much theirs as mine. Years have passed since that first shadow between the trees. The young one is no longer small, now as tall as I am. I still see them from time to time, especially in the hour when the sun sinks low and the forest glows with amber light. They stand at the edge of the clearing, watching, letting me know they are there. And I watch back, my heart full of gratitude for the extraordinary companionship we've carved out of mutual trust. I often think about how rare it is, in this world, to receive a secret so precious and rarer still to be worthy of keeping it. My life in the cabin would have been peaceful enough without them, but they have given it a dimension beyond peace, a sense of belonging to something vast, ancient, and tender. Theirs is a world most people will never see, but I have been granted a window into it. And so, when the wind moves through the pines outside my door, I listen closely. Somewhere behind the cabin, they move too silent, strong, and enduring, carrying with them the gift of trust that binds us across the boundaries of species and the fragile edges of belief. I will keep their secret for as long as I have breath, because some wonders are meant not to be displayed, but to be protected.